Hello, everybody. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, July 23rd. Holland Squallen Quist Tliktumuk Squamish Okmeo. Welcome to the Squamish Nation traditional territory. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have any concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. Could I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Greenlaw. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Our first order of business today is we have a delegation. So we have Sue Brown, who's the Director of Advocacy and a staff lawyer for Justice for Girls. And there you are. I didn't see you hiding behind the podium there. Okay. So the floor is yours. Over to you. And there'll be just for everyone. There'll be a presentation from Ms. Brown. There'll be opportunity for some questions from the group if needed. Okay. So go ahead. Over to you.
Thank you. Just to begin, I'm just going to pass this around, and if you want to take a look at it, try to absorb what you can see, and I'll explain it later, I promise. I'd asked for a poster-sized printout, and that's what I received. It's not big enough to show you from here, so I'll come back to it. So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to address Council today on the unceded territories of the Squamish Nation. It's a privilege that we owe to the Squamish people, thanks to their stewardship of this beautiful corner of the world. The issue I'm here to talk about, however, is not so beautiful, but we need to talk about it. Human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Defining these terms today would take more than the 5 minutes that I have to speak with you this afternoon. So to keep it short, human trafficking is defined in the criminal code as the recruiting, transporting, transferring, receiving, holding, concealing, or harboring of a person, exercising control, direction, or influence over the movements of a person to facilitate their exploitation. There's also a specific provision which criminalizes the trafficking of youth under the age of 18. You need to know that trafficking can take many different forms. Those who traffic can look like boyfriends. They are also family members in many cases. The vast majority of trafficking involves a boyfriend trafficker and/or organized crime. Often they're not mutually exclusive. Trafficking can be facilitated through massage parlors, strip clubs, short-term rentals, hotels, private residences, and online. There are different types of exploitation, including coerced pornography, survival sex, which is sex in exchange for basic necessities like housing and food, and sometimes to feed addiction or support addiction. Online interactive exploitation, which is also known as live sex online, and then indoor and outdoor outcall escort services, as well as outdoor solicitation. Trafficking is distinct from sex work. However, presently, based on the data that we have no way to determine what proportion of the commercial sex market is trafficking versus commercial, consensual sex work. And the distinction, it's really understand, is not linear, and it's not well understood and not clear. It's also very important to understand that a person under the age of 18 cannot consent to transactional sex. It is criminal and exploitation by definition for a child under 18 to be sold. From the work that my organization does throughout this province, I can tell you that girls who are exploited in the commercial sex market get the largest amount of money for traffickers. They're the most lucrative people to traffic. And it's estimated that 90 to 95% of trafficking victims and survivors are female, and at least 25% of those are under the age of 18. And that is a conservative estimate. 82% of traffickers are men. Women do also engage in trafficking. But I also cannot stress enough that the data that we have available to us is like the teeniest, tiniest tip of the iceberg. We really don't understand trafficking in this country, and we especially don't understand trafficking in this province. I have yet to walk into a northern community or a community in this province and not meet a young woman who has been exploited or trafficked. But if you look at the numbers do not reflect that. And so I really think it's important that we acknowledge that the data that we have available isn't sufficient to address the harms and the existence of trafficking as it's happening. And make no mistake about it, trafficking is a financial enterprise, and there are well-established business models. You can apply the logic of business to understand and estimate the demand in the market. In terms of demand, we also don't really understand it very well in Canada, and they're only beginning to develop methods in the US. There's some academics working on to determine how can we establish the actual demand and how do we distinguish between consensual sex work and trafficking. Trafficking is one of the most lucrative underground markets internationally. It's often facilitated alongside drugs and arms trafficking. However, it makes more money than both because traffickers have a commodity that they can resell over and over. Trafficking is a very covert activity. Those who choose this incredibly lucrative business are masterful at exploiting gaps in jurisdiction, laws, and hiding in plain sight. Two factors make trafficking incredibly difficult to prosecute and identify and investigate. The first one is that the barriers to reporting this are virtually insurmountable for survivors and victims due to the psychological and physical methods of control and exploitation used by traffickers. Traffickers facilitate their exploitation through threats of violence, use of violence, coercive control, and addiction. This includes threats to harm family and other things, to take other things away from the person, including basic necessities that they need. At least 50% of trafficking involves links to organized crime, which means there's a significant amount of realistic fear for victims that they could be harmed if they go to the police or they report. There's also a lack of police investigative resources and specialized law enforcement prosecutors in this province and in many parts of the country to successfully and thoroughly investigate and prosecute cases of human trafficking. This is a very complex and layered issue. And I can give you some examples that there are people in communities who know that trafficking is happening, but when they go to the police don't know how to investigate without the survivors coming forward. I went into one community where somebody working in a very credible field gave 19 names of traffickers who were trafficking and exploiting youth to the police, and they were unable to investigate because not a single one of those girls could come forward. And nothing has been done to this date. So when I say that there's very layered and complex issues, it's on both sides. It's with the survivors and the victims, as well as with the police and the investigative resources that we have. And so those two factors make it incredibly difficult for us to estimate where this is happening, to know where it's happening, and to know how to address it and keep people safe. Importantly, and the document that I passed along to you, is it's important to know that traffickers typically move along corridors throughout the country, and there are some corridors that are becoming more and more well known. And the graph that I showed you comes from the Center to End Human Trafficking's one of their reports on what these corridors actually look like. So what you can see on the document, there are black lines, and those black lines denote air travel and how trafficked survivors are transported by traffickers by air. And then there's red lines, and that's roads and how they're trafficked by vehicles. And those are well-known corridors. And what I think is particularly salient and important for us to note, there's 2 points that I want you to note. Number one, if you look at Alberta, I need you to know that the northern dot is Fort McMurray. And so there's one of the biggest commercial sex markets in this country is Alberta, and it's Calgary, Grand Prairie, Edmonton, and Fort McMurray. And that's really important to know. It's also one of the biggest destination points for trafficked survivors who are flown by air from Quebec and Ontario to go out there. Another very important feature of that graph, and I'm going to share the report with you by email afterwards. I'm sorry the visual is inadequate for our purposes today, but I also want you to know how dark British Columbia is on that map. And that's really important, and why I wanted to come and speak to you about this today. Because British Columbia, if you look at the numbers, looks like it has a very low rate of sex trafficking and exploitation. But my hypothesis and my understanding based on the work that we do is that's not because it's not happening, it's because we're not capturing it. It's because we do not have an adequate system in place provincially to support survivors to come forward and report. We don't have resources to support them to exit in any meaningful way, and we don't have adequate resources in and throughout most of our province to meaningfully investigate and prosecute. If you look at the provinces where you see the more lines, more red lines and more black lines, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, and Alberta, what those 4 provinces have in common is they have a provincial action plan to address human trafficking, and they have significant resources in place to educate communities like ours to know how to identify trafficking, to identify best practices, but for lawmaking, including at the municipal level and at the provincial level. And they also have resources flowing. Ontario in particular has a provincial action plan that provides for resources for survivors, including legal aid clinics. They have particular legislation that creates protections for trafficking survivors to get things like restraining orders against their traffickers. That doesn't exist in the criminal code and only exists by provincial enactment, and that's something that we need in this province so survivors can seek protection if they need to. You also need to know that YVR is one of the hubs internationally for trafficked people to come through. We are not immune to trafficking. It's happening here, and we need to be doing a better job at addressing it. And from a law enforcement perspective, provincially, we need better law enforcement resources, both specialized prosecutors as well as specialized investigators to help us provide resources to prosecute these cases. And why am I bringing this to you today? I'm bringing this to you today because I think Squamish needs to take the following points into consideration. I predict that demand in Squamish will increase with the influx of workers from the 2 industrial projects that are coming here. We work in the north, and I assure you that it's not simply a theory that the demand for commercial sex and trafficking increases with industrial projects. It's not a mistake that one of the largest commercial sex markets in this country is in the oil sands in Alberta, Calgary, Grand Prairie, and Fort Mac. It's the epicenter of oil and gas. I also suspect that we already have a corridor going to Whistler, as there's a high market activity and high demand there already. Traffickers will, and you have to think of it like a business model because it's a business model. Traffickers will establish business in Squamish as our population grows, as this corridor becomes more lucrative, along with continued tourism, large industrial camps, and just a general growing population. This is something that Squamish needs to turn their mind to. And most importantly, because we don't have a provincial action plan, your voices through the UBCM and as a district council, I think are important to a larger conversation provincially with other communities about like whether they're seeing trafficking in their communities, whether people are having these conversations. Perhaps it's open to council to consider putting forward a resolution at the next UBCM to call for a provincial action plan to end human trafficking. I also think that council, in addition, can consider committing resources to addressing this issue through better understanding and providing training to district staff for how to identify trafficking and what programs and services could be delivered at the municipal level to address both the lack of access for survivors to resources, as well as potentially resourcing or funding or at least asking the RCMP to bring specialized resources to this area, because they do exist in the RCMP, to ensure that if trafficking isn't already happening here, that it will not take root as this community grows and as the predictors of what I predict to be the likelihood of a future high demand in this province, so that the traffickers can't exploit that. And I think if council takes action now, they might be able to prevent that from happening. So if you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Yeah, I'll go to council first for any questions for our guests. Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
A couple. What is there any sort of toolkit or best practices for a municipality in BC right now, given the lack of provincial regulation?
I think that's an excellent question, and no, I don't believe there is. I know that this conversation is being had in some communities, and I can think about Terrace and Prince George as 2 examples. I know that the province has just recently also started a human trafficking prevention network. And that's something that the district could consider applying for membership to. And that might be a start. And I think that that would be a really important resource. I think it's true that even in the other provinces, they may not, like, that do have provincial action plans. At the municipal level, I'm not sure if they have adequate resources. And I think it's an open question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, another one. Your focus was on trafficking for sexual exploitation. There are other reasons people are trafficked for labor and other things. Do you have any understanding? Are there correlations, or, is one an indicator of the other, or anything like that?
I think that's an excellent question. For the longest time, we focused on sex trafficking, like as an anti-trafficking sort of movement, I would say, in this country. And only recently have people started focusing on labor trafficking. Labor trafficking happens all over this province as well. Fruit pickers, any area where there's a reliance on migrant workers, for example. There's labor trafficking where there's domestic house workers, including child caregivers. There's a high potential for labor trafficking there. And there is, as you pointed out, potential overlap between labor trafficking and sex trafficking. It's not always mutually exclusive.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks very much for coming today. You've spoken about the correlation between industrial projects and human trafficking. Is there data on whether the form of housing, be it housing in the community or housing in a work camp, leads to a higher probability of human trafficking?
I wish there was an answer to that. There is no answer, partly because we don't know very much about human trafficking. As I was saying, we don't have the data, and we also don't have a lot of data or understanding about what's happening with the increases in violence and trafficking associated with industrial projects. What we do know is that demand increases, and we do know that markets have, like commercial sex markets have established themselves in areas where there's large industrial projects in Canada and internationally. You can look at the Texas oil fields, the Bakken oil fields, Fort Mac, Grand Prairie. And I think it would be naive of us to think that that's not going to happen here, and it's not happening up north. And I can say certainly with a lot of experience having spoken to people in Kitimat, Terrace, Hazelton, and Prince Rupert, and girls in particular, that there's a lot of trafficking happening there as well. We need better impact assessments. We need funded research and better resources to really truly understand the link.
Thank you. My question, thank you for the, I know that you could probably give even more fulsome presentations on all the individual pieces of this, but I found this quite enlightening. And on the quest to do better and be better and advocate to other orders of government, you said Ontario, you spoke quite highly of. Would you consider that to be the sort of the gold standard? Although I'm sure they could probably do more as well. But like, is that a reasonable place to look and to advocate for similar things to what they have in place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when it comes to addressing trafficking, we have what we call the 4 Ps, or the 4 pillars. That's prevention. The main ones are prevention, prosecution, and oh gosh, I can't remember the P's. Anyways, there's 4 pillars. You'll find them in the National Human Trafficking, Anti-Trafficking Plan. You'll also find them in international frameworks for what the best responses are for human trafficking. And what I can say is Ontario hits all 4 of those pillars quite effectively. I have to say what they're doing really well is they're walking the talk in terms of actually funding all of the services that are necessary, namely the support services, the housing supports, the protection supports. It's one of those other Ps, and which are like restraining orders and other safe houses. We don't have a single child safe house for trafficked survivors in this province. If I were to ask or provide an opportunity for a young woman to leave a community and try to leave a place where she's being trafficked, I don't have anywhere I can offer her that's safe in this particular province. And so that's something that they have. And then they have really highly specialized law enforcement units that specialize in trafficking investigations. And then they have specialized prosecutors as well who prosecute. And so I think when you look at the numbers between Ontario and British Columbia, you'll see a drastically higher number in Ontario. And I think that's because they're doing something right. I don't know that it's ever been subjected to a formal evaluation. So I'm sure it has problems that I'm not aware of.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think this is a very important topic and doesn't just fall into the advocacy category. I'm going to familiarize myself with all four of the P's and figure out and see where those opportunities exist for us, but also to advocate to other orders of government to address this issue more fulsomely in the province. So thank you very much for your time and for coming to see us tonight. Oh, and I've got Councillor, sorry, I was looking out the windshield. Okay, I'll go to Councillor Greenlaw for last word on this.
Thanks. Yeah, well, I'll echo all of Mayor Herford's statements. I think this is a super important conversation. I suspect one of the reasons why it's not researched more is that at 86%, or sorry, what did you say? 90 to 95% of the trafficked individuals are female. I suspect that's not a coincidence. But I was wondering if you had any recommendations for kind of spreading education to the public about human trafficking to kind of focus on that prevention piece.
I think that's excellent. So there's two sides to that. There's public education in terms of making people aware that this is an issue, and we provide education in schools to groups of girls about like how to identify trafficking, what it is, and just educating the populations we know are likely to be targeted. And then a really key piece that I think the district could play a role in is ensuring that all of the people who are engaged in service and hospitality are also trained, because it's hotel workers, it's service workers, it's people who see people day to day, bus drivers, who are the people who are going to be spotting the circumstances where they think and they see somebody who might be being trafficked. And we see that time and time again. So I think providing resources for training to those sectors would go a long way to addressing this issue. And there are some fabulous training programs available. And I think having district staff trained as well. So you're looking at, you know, relevant bylaws and services through that lens is invaluable.
And I'm just wondering, when you talk about the different personnel who should be trained, would that probably also include like teachers and doctors?
Social workers, anybody who's doing frontline work. Absolutely. And police officers, not all are trained.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're going to move on to some other agenda items. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to, you mentioned there'd be a follow-up email. So I look forward to digging into that. Oh, and with the, yeah, the poster size. No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for all the work that you do and for your time to come see us today. So next we have the consent agenda. We have some minutes in there and a few recommendations from committee in there as well. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to pull out the Corporate Policy Modernization Project from the consent agenda.
Okay. Would you, with that removed, I'll move the remainder of the consent agenda. Is there second by Councillor French? All in favor? Motion carries. I suppose now's I don't really have a spot for that. So let's do it. Let's do it now. Would you like to speak to the piece that you pulled, Councillor French?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with everything in the recommendation from the committee, except for item number 7, approve the new exempt employees total compensation policy, consolidation of the former exempt staff benefits policy and exempt staff salary policy. After our discussion around this earlier today, and then revisiting it, I feel like this is a really big piece of policy that I'd like to spend more time with. So what I'm suggesting we do is that I move the recommendation from the committee removing item number 7, and we deal with that separately. And if I've got a seconder, I'll move that.
Are you seconding that? So what you've moved is the committee recommendation removing number 7, and we'll deal with that separately. And that's second. Okay, so everyone's clear on that. Do you have additional? I'll give you as a mover. Do you have any additional comments? I feel like no. I'll hold my comments till we deal with that particular item that was pulled. Otherwise, I think we just had a session on this afternoon. So, or do you? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this is an example, I think, of a great use of our committee of the whole. We have a committee of the whole where we have a discussion, things are happening in the moment, and then I often find myself stepping back and thinking, wait a minute, what about this and what about that? And this is an example where following the committee of the whole, I had a few more thoughts, and I think this thing is worth bringing back for a slightly deeper conversation.
Okay. So we're going to deal with the piece that isn't that, and then we'll come back to that piece and we'll figure out what to do with that particular piece. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. So now, do you have a motion associated with number 7, Rudy, Councillor French? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I have a motion that I'll test. And that would be that item number 7 be brought back to a future committee of the whole for further discussion and consideration. And if there's a seconder for that, I'll speak to it.
Are you Lauren, are you seconding that? Okay.
So when I read through this policy over the weekend, it occurred to me that this is an important piece of policy. And then as we worked through it earlier today, I was also at the end of our conversation left with a feeling like this particular one did not get the attention that it deserves. It did not get the scrutiny that I think it deserves. And that's why I'm hesitant and wanting to deal with this particular motion in this way. I feel like this particular policy has got broad reaching potential impacts around staffing and salaries and benefits for all of our district of Squamish employees. And that's why I'd like to see this particular one just brought back for a deeper dive and deeper consideration by council.
Okay. Others on this? Councillor French, it is the exempt policy. So when you say broader impacts, are you worried about how this has a knock-on impact? Are you thinking this plays into or exploring what impact it has, if any, into unionized positions, that sort of thing? Is that what you're thinking? Okay. Personally, I feel, when we get through these, I want everyone to ensure they have enough time with each piece that we contemplate in a committee of the whole. So when we get committee of the whole recommendations, in a special or regular, that we can accept them and continue on. So my preference would have been that this would be, dealt with in the motion coming out of the cow, but that's okay. We're here. We're not that far from it. But I also am comfortable with the changes that were made there. So I'm having a hard time. The motion asks for a deeper dive at an additional meeting, but doesn't really fill in where those holes are in the motion itself. So I don't know that this motion gives staff the direction that would be needed to provide the clarity that's being sought in comments. So I'm not really supportive of this as it's packaged here, but I could maybe be convinced. So I'll go to Councillor Hamilton.
I'll speak to it to why I think this particular piece has potential consequences throughout our organization that we need to perhaps reflect upon. This new compensation policy, if I understand it correctly, which I hope I do, gives 3 extra vacation days to exempt employees from what they have currently. I'm not opposed to that, but that will have capacity impacts on our organization. And I'd like to understand what those capacity impacts are going to be. We know that our organization has significant staff capacity limitations, and I'd like to understand what impact this decision is going to have on those limitations.
Councillor Penningill.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I'm going to vote on this. I think, as I believe I raised earlier, I have some concern that, you know, again, our employee is the CAO, and I feel that through our budget and so on, we deal with the funding of and resourcing of our staffing, and understand sort of for a given budget item, this is the capacity and the output, the outcomes we will achieve. And I feel that's an appropriate level for council to operate at. I worry if we delve too far into the specifics of a compensation policy, we are, I think, getting too far into the role I see our CAO and her team having responsibility for. I also, you know, this is a policy and not a bylaw, so there's more ability to change and adjust. But I do respect my colleagues' wishes to understand a bit better. But I guess for me, I'm, you know, fairly comfortable with where this is, and I am concerned about us getting into a discussion at a committee of the whole. Where we are sort of managing what I believe we largely delegate to our CAO and her team. I would like to make sure that we stay at a level of understanding for a given community budget. These are the outcomes we will receive, and the specifics of how and details about people's pay and compensation. I start to feel like we're getting outside of our best use of our time, but I'll continue to mull on this for a few more seconds.
Thank you. Other comments on this? The description in the package was of this policy is amalgamation of benefits and salary policies, modernization of language, and clarity of compensation provided to various exempt employment statuses, and slight change to vacation allotment. So this is a new policy that our staff felt was needed to achieve those things, and I felt like that met the bar for me. We do know that there's some, as part of that presentation, there were quite a long path of policies that will need to come back to us, and I could see, you know, perhaps revisiting this, you know, as one of those other pieces. But for allotment of time at the council table, I think that things around our budget and compensation in general, like those high level things, we absolutely need to spend a lot of time and attention on. This particular piece of that puzzle, I think, received the time today, so I won't be supporting the motion as it stands. Sure. Let's call it. I'll call the question, and then we can maybe have a conversation there. So with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Anderson, Pettingill, and Mayor Herford oppose. Motion fails. We will take this opportunity. So I'll go to Ms. Glendale. Would you like to clarify anything you heard there, or add some context?
Thank you. My intention was not to interrupt the motion on the floor, but just provide clarity that may have helped with the vote. The additional vacation that council referred to, when I look at the policy, and I'm trying to find the collective agreement online. I have it with vacation. But basically with exempt staff, it used to be that it would start at 3 weeks. Then after a certain amount of time, it would go to 4.4 and then it would go to 6. And instead what's happening is it goes 3, 4, 5, 6 in terms of weeks. Now I don't have the two tables beside to see, the exact change and how much extra is actually there. So it would really only affect employees currently at 4.4 weeks. They would go up to 5. Anyway, I'd have to do the analysis to see the impact, but it's not a broad, everybody gets an extra 3 extra days, just for clarity. It depends on your timing, your seniority, and how long you're in that gap. Because over time, you continue to go up in weeks. So I don't have the exact impact, but it isn't 3 extra days for everybody, just in case that was the misunderstanding.
Okay, so I'm going to move the committee recommendation for number 7, if there's a seconder. Okay, Councillor Penningill, I think I've spoken to this. I do think, but I guess I'll take the opportunity to add that our compensation of our staff in not just exempt staff and not just union staff, but overall our entire staff is something that we need to pay particular attention to and make sure that things are being handled there in an appropriate way. This piece, I think, adds some important clarity and cleans up some things that were kind of nonsensical and pulls things in line. So I'm happy to see this piece of work, but this is by no means the last touch point for anything to do with staff compensation. Go to Councillor Penningill.
Yeah, I'll also be supporting this. I think sort of fell on the side of hoping for now to see this move forward. I think there's enough additional value in what's there to move forward with it. I do think, given our CAO's comments, it would be good to have clarity on the 3-step versus 4-step breakdown as part of our budgeting. And if at that time we still have a concern, I think I'd be supportive of bringing back the policy and amending it. And again, it's not a bylaw, so it's one single action and vote to do that if we feel like we need to do so. I'm not going to change the motion, but it'd be great to have that information, at some point during the budgeting process. And I think, to my mind, we can move forward and adjust things if we need to at that point. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
I appreciate my colleague's initiative to bring this forward for further discussion. However, I am satisfied with the clarifications that have been given and with my interpretation of where we're at earlier today. I would also be concerned about the use of our meeting time to address this under the circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wrinkle, I just want to point out to everyone is that in the first motion, one of the things we did was rescind some council policies that would be needed to rely upon should this motion fail. So we're complicating our lives if this motion doesn't pass it at this point. We'll need to go back and figure out how to untangle that. But the last motion rescinded exempt staff benefits policy, salary policy, that were meant to be replaced with this piece that we're talking about here. So we need to provide our staff with direction. And I think I urge you to support this motion for that reason, amongst others. Councillor French.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Herford. My concern's been registered, and I'm comfortable with what I've heard, and I don't want this to fail because I think it would make our lives unnecessarily complicated. So with my concern registered, I'll be supporting the motion.
Thank you. Do you want to comment or? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I also looked at the quagmire we could get ourselves into with this motion if it doesn't go clearly one way or the other. And I don't think it's worth getting into that potential quagmire. And so I do want to flag that as we go through this this policy review, I hope that we can keep an eye on when these policies are going to have organizational capacity impacts and flag whether they could be substantial or not. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next, we have staff reports up next. Ms. Foxford.
Thank you, Mayor. No presentation today, but I do have an introduction to the Community Works Fund 24 to 2034 agreement. The Community Works Fund, otherwise known as the CWF agreement, is a tripartite agreement between Canada, British Columbia, and the unions of BC municipalities, and replaces the 2014 to 2024 agreement. The CWF program is one of the funding streams of the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly the gas tax, or otherwise known as the gas tax, and provides the administrative framework for local governments and other recipients in British Columbia from 2024 to 2034. The CWF allocation funding to all local governments is based based on per capita formula that includes a funding floor. Local governments may direct the funding towards eligible costs of eligible projects as set out in the CWF agreement and report annually on these projects and their outcomes. The district is expected to receive 1.148 million annually from 24 to 26, which will be adjusted based on the 2026 census data for 2027 and beyond. The district received 970,000 annually in the previous 2 years. In order to receive the first payment under the renewed program, local governments must enter into a CWF agreement with UBCM. The first transfer is expected to be in August 2024. CWF funds received by UBCM in a given year will be required to be fully expended on eligible projects within 5 years. Exceptions will be considered on a case-by-case basis and identified through a long-term capital or the asset management plan of the organization. There are a few minor changes to the agreement, most notably the eligible expenditures category, and the details are in a memo that is accompanied in the council package. So the staff recommendation before you today is to endorse the district entering into the 2024 to 2034 Community Works Fund agreement under the Canada Community Building Fund, and to authorize the mayor and the corporate officer to execute the 2024 to 2034 Community Works Agreement between the District of Squamish and the Union of BC Municipalities as presented today, July 23rd, special business meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions at all, Council, or I would entertain a motion as well. Go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Mayor, I'm happy. I'd like to offer a comment, but I'm happy to wait for the motion as well.
Okay, moved, and you're
Which I can.
yeah, there you go.
Please.
You're the seconder. So, Councillor French, do you want to go ahead, Councillor Anderson?
Yes, I'd just like to make an observation regarding the eligible projects for this funding program. It's not a new one. As the staff report points out, this is a new 10-year agreement replacing a past 10-year agreement, of which the district has taken advantage of for other projects. There's a long list of needs on our part, but in the list of eligible projects, I'd just like to highlight one of the items there, and that is short sea shipping. Short sea shipping is any kind of coastwise shipping, which is what Site B is all about. And it also includes passenger ferry. So conceivably, some of the projects that we could apply for funding in future, in collaboration with the Squamish Nation, is in some well-recognized needs at Site B, including dredging of the Blind Channel. passenger ferry also included in there. So any dredging needs or terminal facility needs could be an object for a funding application in future. This UBCM tripartite agreement is not the only one for which the Squamish Nation is not eligible. There is another as well that has come up in the past. And so this program might in future be considered in our conversations with the Squamish Nation on project collaboration. Just wanted to make that observation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this? Yeah, thank you. I think this is this this is great. It's getting funding from other orders of government. So really, it's the eligibility piece, which I think is really of interest, which again is not decided by us, but we have lots of projects that fit into that long list that's there. Thank you, Councillor Anderson, for highlighting some. We also have in there sport infrastructure, recreational infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, tourism infrastructure. These are all things that are highlighted as importance in our community. So I'm sure we can find wonderful things to do with these funds when we get them. So thank you for all your work to get us this far. And with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I'll be looking for a motion to close, please. Councillor Hamilton, second by Councillor Greenlaw. All in favor? Motion carries. So we'll recess now. And I think we need 10 minutes, something like that. So 5:30 or thereabouts, we'll reconvene in the closed. Thank you.